Hello again. Many doctors were irritated a couple of weeks ago when Sajid Javid denounced their medical equipment as being systemically racist. He announced the launch of a review into systemic racism and bias in medical devices to examine why people of colour and women have worse health outcomes. Medical staff were even more annoyed when he suggested that the greater number of people of colour who have died of COVID was also symptomatic of racism in the health service. It need hardly be said that both claims are altogether false and without any foundation whatsoever. It can, I think, not be wholly a coincidence that the first ethnic minority health secretary in this country should also be the first one to detect racism in stethoscopes and thermometers. He talked both in a television interview and also a piece which he wrote in the Sunday Times newspaper about oximeters, which measure the level of oxygen in a person's bloodstream. These give different readings according to whether a person's skin is white or black. Here are his actual words so people can judge for themselves what sort of fellow he is. There are research papers already on this and no one did anything about it. Now, I'm not saying this was deliberate by anyone. I think it's just a systemic issue, potentially, with medical devices, and it may go even further than that with medical textbooks, for example. It is easy to look at a machine and assume that everyone's getting the same experience, but technologies are created and developed by people, and so bias, however inadvertent, can be an issue here too. So questions like who is writing the code, how a product is tested, and who is sitting round the boardroom table are critical, especially when it comes to our health. This, of course, caused great rejoicing among those who wish to believe that Britain is an institutionally racist country. But not to find a point on it, it is complete nonsense. Even before oximeters began to be used clinically, it was obvious that readings would have to be adjusted according to whether somebody had a very pale skin or were as dark as someone from West Africa. They worked through shining a light through the skin at the blood vessels underneath. And so it was clear that different skin would give different readings according to whether it was darker or lighter. This was so obvious that it was taken into account even in the research stage. That's why doctors are taught to interpret readings with reference to ethnicity. In a white person, a reading of 92% or above shows an adequate level of oxygen. In a black person, this must be higher, and so 95% or above is judged as sufficiently oxygenated. I'm not a doctor, but I have picked this piece of information up simply by talking to medical staff about the subject when my own oxygen levels have been checked over the years. I was interested in this and I talked to nurses using oximeters and they all knew about this. They all knew that they had to adjust the levels, adjust the readings according to the ethnicity of the person whose oxygen levels they were measuring. Is it really asking too much to expect that the Secretary of State for Health might have at least as much knowledge on this subject as some old gimp banging away the keyboard in his living room? Well, apparently it is too much to expect. Javid also hinted that the fact that more black people and those of South Asian origin had died of COVID might show racism at work in the National Health Service. This too is, of course, rubbish. Black people and Asians have greater life expectancy in this country than white people. Is that systemic racism as well against white folk? There are 3 good reasons why people with dark skins are more likely to die of COVID than white people, and none of them have anything at all to do with racial prejudice. The first is that black people and Asians often have larger families spanning more than one generation, whom they see and come into regular contact with. 70 years ago, 80 years ago in Britain, it used to be like that here. people would have their mothers and fathers living in the next street or cousins living in the same area, and they used to see more of their extended family. Grandparents might look after the babies perhaps, or their cousins would help, they would hang out together. It's not like that generally amongst white British families now. We tend towards a nuclear family, just the parents and children living together, and we see grandparents and cousins and uncles and aunts occasionally. It's in the average family, say, of Pakistani origin, the case is quite different. Their old people are an integral part of family life, as are other members of the extended families. They look after each other's children, they visit each other's houses, they're in and out of each other's houses far more than white people tend to be, for the simple reason that families tend to stick to one small area. Not all, obviously, but there is a tendency. So you'll have a Sylheti community centred around a few streets, or a Pakistani community. They see their families a lot more than the average white person does. There's religious observance. Everybody gathers at a mosque each week, which is something that, again, it used to happen in Britain when more people went to church, but it's stopped now. But it's still common amongst people of Pakistani and Bangladeshi origin. It's hardly surprising that a virus would spread more rapidly in a community like that, given that lifestyle. A greater proportion of people of colour work in care homes and hospitals too, which means there's a greater chance of picking up germs to which the rest of us are not exposed. Then too, people of African and Caribbean heritage are, on average, more likely to be obese than white British people, and this too raises certain health risks. There is not the least evidence that the National Health Service of Britain is institutionally racist, and I find it a little infuriating to find it being described so by a man so ignorant of medicine and medical procedures that it is difficult to know why he was given the job of Health Secretary in the first place.